Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here at Carpenter Avenue Elementary School. Delighted to be here, and nice to see so many bright, shiny parent faces early in the morning. And we are going to be working today on understanding learning differences. Before I begin, though, we have the quick reminder on screen here. Uncle Sam wants you, please do turn off your cell phone. Or turn it on stun. You already have this in front of you, so I'm going to move right past that. And now I'm going to have you look at the screen. See if you can read that. That's your homework right now. Not your homework, your classwork, your morning work. Raise your hand if you think this is an easy slide to read. Raise your hand if you think this is a hard slide to read. And there's no judgment on any of you, okay? You have a question about it, or you're just trying to... No, it's okay. According to research at an English university, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are, only that the first and last letters are at the right places. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. This is because we do not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Now, I don't agree with that completely. Notice some of you had trouble reading it, and some of you found it easy to read, and that's the point. Just because a particular wonderful, prestigious study says that it should be easy for all of us to read, it doesn't mean that it is. We have different minds, different mindsets, different ways of thinking, different ways of looking at things, different ways of understanding things, and that's what we're going to get into right now. Okay? Imagine having important ideas to communicate. We all have important ideas to communicate. Your children have important ideas to communicate. We all have important ideas to communicate, but being unable to express them, perhaps feeling bombarded by sights and sounds, and unable to focus your attention. Some of us in here might be hearing people over in the kitchen there, and it makes it harder for us to be able to function and focus in here right now, as an example. Or we hear a door opening or closing, and it might disturb us. Think about the distractions that affect our children. That's just one thing to keep in mind. Here's another one. Imagine trying to read or add, but not being able to make sense of the letters or numbers. Think about your children. Imagine being so nervous that you cannot even do that which you know you can do. Not asking any of you to judge yourselves on any of these, but think about how these might affect you, some of these issues, and how some of these issues may be affecting some of your children as well. Imagine being unable to focus due to the ceiling tiles being uneven or mismatched. As I look up at the ceiling and I see, the wear and tear over there, there might have been some water damage at some point, okay? There are kids who sit in a classroom who cannot function on the lesson at hand because they see something that is just slightly out of order that the rest of the class is totally clueless about. Think about your children. I'm recognizing some people's faces in here in the sense that they are having some of these issues resonate with them. Imagine trying to read this page, one word at a time, struggling to get to the end of a sentence, and then forgetting what you just read. By the way, parents, sometimes you ask your children at night, you say, did you do your homework? Did you read blah, 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 whatever it was, social studies, English, whatever it was they're supposed to read? That's not the right question to ask. The question is, did you read it, and do you know what you read? Okay? Because many of us, some of us in here, maybe we start reading the newspaper when we're reading an article, and we get to the bottom of a page, and we're like, wait a minute, I don't even know what that article was about. Well, that happens to our children sometimes. It's not just the reading of it, it's does it resonate with us? Can we remember it? Imagine getting so angry with yourself that you can't get your work done. That happens with some of our children as well. Look at that face. Imagine just being so bored in school, with no challenge, and nothing to learn. Some of our children might be in classrooms where they already know everything the teacher's trying to teach. Maybe it's because we've done such a great job at home educating as well, or maybe they just happen to be that sharp that they get it in 5 seconds, or the rest of the class needs the next 50 minutes to get it. Imagine the frustration of not being able to trust your own senses as letters and words move and dance about on the paper all the time. And again, think about these things. You may not even know that some of these things may be happening within your child's mind and consciousness and perception. These are just a few examples, and I could go on and on, but I won't. We're going to move on to another part of the presentation, but that's just a beginning here to get you thinking about what could be happening with your child in a classroom. Are you okay? Am I blocking you? Okay. There are just a few examples of challenges faced in schools each day by countless children, and that poses challenges for their teachers and for you as their parents. Here's some statistics for you. You don't need to memorize these, but some interesting statistics. Up to 15% of the United States population, adults and children, has significant difficulty learning to read according to the National Institute of Health. According to the NIH, think about that, 15% of our population has difficulty learning to read. We can reduce that fraction. Think about this, okay? 3 out of every 20 people you know. Should we count how many people are in here and decide which of the 3 or so of you in here? No. Okay? But think about that. Now let's look at the statistic on the bottom, which is a different statistic from the National Center for Learning Disabilities. It estimates that 2.9 million school-age children in this country, 5%, that's 1 out of 20, of those in public schools are classified as having specific diagnosable learning disabilities needing some kind of special education support. So if one study says 3 out of every 20 of people in this country have these learning difficulties, and 1 out of every 20 of them are diagnosed as having these learning difficulties, we can do the subtraction there. You didn't know you were coming into doing math this morning. That leaves 2 out of every 20, 1 out of every 10 kids potentially who have an issue that is not diagnosed and is not getting the assistance that they need. Now, my philosophy of education, as Valeska mentioned, I'm a Ph.D. in education. I specialize in learning differences. My doctoral work specifically was in understanding learning differences and working on teaching strategies. My dissertational work, very specifically, by the way, was non-medicinal alternatives to dealing with ADHD. Could elaborate on all of those things another time, but nonetheless, my whole philosophy is that every child has learning differences because every child learns differently. You might be sitting here and thinking to yourself, well, my child, none of those things you showed me so far fits my child. My child's doing just fine and perfectly in the classroom. That's wonderful. But still, your child learns differently than every other child in that classroom, even if they're more in the mainstream norm. If the way the traditional classroom is working reasonably well for your child, it still doesn't mean that there's not something you could consider doing that could help your child succeed and optimize how he or she grows and develops educationally and otherwise. But again, this is the core of my educational belief. LD is a term I will use today. You may have heard it used before as well. Okay? LD, back in the day when some of us were kids, we used to call it a learning disorder. Then the educational world decided, well, disorder is a little too strong, so let's call it a learning disability. And some of us in the educational world still prefer to not even use that because we don't want to put a negative stigma on it. I prefer to use the term learning difference. And again, like I said, every child learns differently, but some have more pronounced, more noticeable, maybe even diagnosable learning differences. Okay? I will use these terms interchangeably though. Do not be overwhelmed by this particular slide, but look at this umbrella. All of these things on the bottom, some of which you may have heard of and some of which you may have never heard of in your life, are different possible diagnoses that a child could have, or an adult, for some kind of a learning difference. I'm not asking you to look at this too heavily. I'm not asking you to memorize this in any way, shape, or form. One of the things I will explain a little further later is I do not believe in you trying to label your child if you can avoid it, okay? It's better to just figure out who your child is, get to know your child, let's figure out what's best for your child, and let's find solutions and not worry about labels. But nonetheless, these are all sorts of things that a professional educator could potentially decide to label a certain child. Some of them are big buzzwords in education and you hear them more often than others. It doesn't mean they're more common than others, it just means that they're the ones that we hear about in the media and therefore we keep perpetuating those labels. If you think, though, your child might have a learning difference, then you may feel overwhelmed by diagnoses and tests and solutions. Let's not have you be overwhelmed. There's the roadmap. We're going to try and give you a little bit of a roadmap today. Back in the day, we used to use these things called paper maps. I know we all have Waze or other GPS items on our phones and in our cars and all of that. And wouldn't it be nice if we could just turn on our phone and have it guide us towards how to best help our child? It's not that easy, but let me help you navigate the way a little bit. And I don't know if you can read the sign that's way off in the distance. Can anybody read it? It's okay. It says future. The future is out there, okay? Whether we navigate well or not, the future is a destination that we are heading to. But the question is, what would happen if we're driving down this road here and we don't curve with the road? We're off in the trees, okay? Oh, we're off of a cliff further down or something of that nature. Let's find the best way to navigate the road. Look at her. Hopefully none of the teachers here look like her. Hopefully none of you have had teachers that look like her. It's the facial expression. It's not the aesthetics of her beauty or anything of that nature I'm talking about. But here's a quote that a teacher could very well have said. He has the ability. If he just tried harder, he could do it. But he chooses not to do the work. Well, guess what? That may not be the case. Maybe we need to help him succeed, and we shouldn't judge him so harshly. We need to find a way. It's our job as parents, and it should be the job of our teachers, for us to come together and join forces as a team to help a child succeed. I was a heretic when I was a teacher, and I used to explain to my students, which a lot of teachers, other teachers didn't like me to explain this to my students. I'd tell my students, when I'm giving you a test, it's not to test you. It's to test me. It's to test and determine whether I was successful in helping you learn what you're supposed to be learning here. okay? And if you didn't do well on the test, then that means I have to find another way to help you succeed. That's my challenge. Many teachers don't look at it that way, but this one certainly would not. Here's another teacher for us. Look at his body language, right? If she would just pay attention, she would get it. Or how about this teacher? After I give the instructions, he sits there and stares at his paper. He's not motivated. And many, many teachers love to use that phrase, not motivated, not motivated. But maybe they don't know how to connect with it, to be engaged with it, etc. Just because the results may not be what we would like, it does not mean that the child's efforts are not his or her best. Sometimes children with LDs, whichever terminology you prefer to use there, cannot on their own try harder. They cannot on their own pay closer attention. They cannot on their own improve motivation. Sometimes, I'm not saying sometimes they can, but many times they can't. Children often need our help. That's our job. That's why they have us. We're supposed to be their greatest advocates and supports and guides and helpers. That's our role in life as we've chosen to have children. LDs are often not a matter of intelligence, is very important to make clear. Different brains work differently, which is one of the things we're about to talk about. LDs may be a matter of how information is received, processed, communicated, etc. I'm going to elaborate on all of that to some degree for you. LDs may be a matter of seeing, hearing, or understanding differently. Notice that key word, LD, learning differences, learning differently, understanding differently. Now, not expecting this to be a science lesson. We already made you do some math this morning. This is not going to be a science lesson and expecting you to know all of your parts of the brain. But the key thing is, there is hope because the brain can change. Okay? The brain is designed in a certain way and it has the ability to change, which I'm going to explain to you. The brain, though, is the most powerful muscle in the human body. Think about it. If our children sit, and I'm sure none of the children in this, represented by the parents in this room, sit in front of TVs and computer games and video games and all of that, just passively and become these little couch potato children and are so out of shape and all of that kind of thing. But if we don't allow our children to use their legs, they will atrophy. If we don't have them doing sports and things that use their arms, they will atrophy. If we don't use the physical muscles that we think about in our body, they will atrophy. And it's the same thing with the brain. If we don't challenge a child's brain, if we don't, really get that brain working and churning and spinning, it will atrophy. It's the most important, the most powerful muscle in the human body, and as with any muscle, it needs exercise. Now, this is a term you may or may not have heard of. It's only recently hit the news. I've been talking about it for the last 20 plus years, but recently I'm hearing studies and others talking about it. It's called neuroplasticity. Who heard that before today, that term? Anybody? Okay, that's great. Who heard it before 5 years ago? None of you. Okay. Neuroplasticity is the brain's natural lifelong ability to change. That's what it is. It's the brain's ability to change over time, to form new connections, to develop new brain cells, to improve in response, and to experience and learning. Look at the phone wires up here. These things still do exist. We have our cell phones, but these things still do exist. Faulty wiring in the brain disrupts normal lines of communication. And it makes it difficult to process information easily. If telephone service, is down in a certain area of the city, the phone company has to go out and fix the problem by rewiring the connections. That's what we have to do sometimes for our children's brains. We have to rewire the connections. Under the right learning conditions, the brain has the ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Those new connections facilitate skills like reading and writing that had been difficult using the old connections. We're going to get a little further. I connect this again. Every child has learning differences. Make this your new mantra. Because every child learns differently. It's expected for there to be obstacles in a child's way. You're trying to help your child climb the ladder to success. There will be obstacles in the way. Parents need to be there to remove the obstacles and ultimately help their children remove the obstacles themselves. Sometimes you have to pick your child up and carry them across an obstacle. Then you help them learn to jump over it or go around it or work their way through it themselves. Pretend our children are in a race. And it's important to help children get off on the right foot. Now, I'm not saying childhood should be a race. I don't want you to get the wrong idea from this slide. There's all sorts of other issues with that. But life is a race in a way. We're kind of moving forward. We're not supposed to be running back. We're supposed to be moving forward. But here comes the question. Are you there on the sidelines and supporting your child when they're in the race? And if you are there on the sidelines, Are you there with the cup of water that they need? And this is not the health lesson. I also do a presentation on raising healthy children. We're not talking about soda here. That's not really the issue. The issue is, are you providing them the right fuel they need? When your child is in a race, you need to be there with the cup to give them the water. You give them the soda, it's going to work against their success. So maybe you think you're doing all sorts of great things to help your child, and maybe you are, but maybe you're doing things to help your child, and maybe they're not the right things. Maybe it's the soda instead of the water. A good attitude, by the way, won't solve the problem, but it can give your child hope and confidence that things can improve. You know, you don't want to just be, you know, like some silver-clouded parent who everything's fine, everything's going to be just all right. You want to be there with a positive attitude, but a positive attitude that's being used for the sake of motivation and change where necessary and improvement as possible and all of that. But keep a positive attitude. Don't be a downer on it. Parenting a child, and especially a child, not just a child, but especially a child with an LD is never easy because children don't come with instruction manuals. Okay? I don't know if any of you remember the old TV show from, I think it was the late 70s, early 80s. You might, some of you know, Greatest American Hero. Anybody remember that show? Yeah. Some of you? Believe it or not. Okay? I'm glad you know the song and like the song. Remember the whole premise of the show was that, you know, Ralph Hinckley, this high school teacher, you know, was contacted by aliens, and they gave him this special superhero suit that enabled him to go out and solve problems of the world, but he lost the manual. So he doesn't know how to use the suit, so he's trying to figure out how to make it fly, how to land, how to all these different things. Well, your children, you know, when these little aliens came to you when they were born, okay, they're aliens, right? They're wonderful little aliens, but they're aliens. And they don't come with an instruction manual. And maybe you figured out the instruction manual for your oldest child, and now you're looking at the next child and you're like, wait a minute, this instruction manual doesn't fit. This is a different game to learn how to play here. Now, this is kind of a summary of stuff that you don't need to know all of this here, but it's just kind of a nice little thing. And if any of the slides I present, by the way, I don't usually print handouts in advance because I never know who wants which and what, and I hate to waste paper and all of that. But if there's a particular slide that you might want, like to hang on a refrigerator, and this could be one of them, it's called How Do I Best Help My Child? You could write it down, and if you wanted to, I could email it to you or email it to Valeska to share with you, whichever the case might be. But quickly, I know that's a little too much text for the visual that we have here right now. Understand that every child learns differently, has obstacles, has gifts, has potential, needs love, needs self-esteem, needs support, emotional, educational, and moral, needs to develop independence. To try to understand your child, to respect your child, to have realistic expectations. We're going to talk more about that. But you don't want to accept too little, but you don't want to expect too much. And that's a fine line to walk. It's like you're a tightrope walker in the circus, so to speak, okay? You know, some parents, they expect too little of their children. Their children will never achieve what they could achieve because they just let them just coast along. Some parents, they expect too much, and if the bar is too high, then the child can't reach it, and they get discouraged and all of that. So there's a fine line to walk there, and we can talk more about how to do that now or another time, but I'm going to keep going here for now. Don't give up. Become your child's best advocate. Don't be snowed. I'll explain a little more of that later. And remember that your child learns from you. From your attitude, from your own learning, from your own teaching, and from your leadership. That's kind of just a nice little parenting summary slide. But now, let's go back to think about the telephone wires. Well, now here we are. This looks like LA, doesn't it? Looks like the streets I was coming over here. Road closed. Detour. See LDs as a detour and not a roadblock. When you see this in front of you on the road, do you just decide, I'm going to park my car and just sit here and wait for it to go away? Maybe you want to do that sometimes. Don't sit back and let someone else be responsible for providing your child with the tools needed to learn successfully. You need to be in the driver's seat of your child's education, growth, and development. Again, I say that. You need to be in the driver's seat. Yes, there may be some great teachers that are there for your child. There may be some great youth group leaders. There may be all sorts of others that are there for your child. But you need to be the one in the driver's seat, or you and the other parent, etc. You can, this is my really bad humor, you don't know me well enough yet. You can and should take an active role in your child's education. All right. Don't worry about determining the label or type of disorder. As I said, we saw that umbrella many slides before that was overwhelming with all the rain pouring down underneath that umbrella of potential LDs. Don't worry about the label or type of disorder. Focus instead on determining how to best support your child, and I know that's why you're here this morning and we're moving in that direction. Caution! Beware of unnecessary labels. I'm not saying that aren't labels sometimes that may not be accurate, but sometimes you label a child and it works against their best interest in the long term. It's good for you to have the knowledge and consciousness of where your child is, but sometimes we want to avoid these things. Now, a lag is not an LD. I want to clarify that. There's a big difference and there's a lot of confusion that I even find with a lot of teachers sometimes. Children show natural differences in their rates of development. Sometimes what seems to be a learning disability may simply be a delay in maturation. We mature at different paces. Late bloomers learn at their own paces and in their own time, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as there is some progress moving forward. This, don't worry about it, I've got it broken down into a bunch of smaller slides. But this is, so if I were to give it as a handout, it's got a lot of stuff on one page. If anybody can read that though, you've been drinking plenty of your carrot juice, I guess. This is the first part of it. These are the possible categories of concern. There's many pages here, and then we're going to talk about a little elaboration on all of this, okay? But this is the kind of stuff that I've worked with teachers on to try and help teachers better understand how to better understand what may or may not be working with the students in their classrooms. It's good for parents to be armed with this ammunition. There are motor difficulties, which is an output activity. And we're going to talk about the difference between input and output activities, how stuff comes into us and how stuff comes out of us as children, as learners, etc. Motor difficulties are an output activity, and the brain must be able to communicate with the limbs to complete the action. Here's examples. Movement, walking across this room. Coordination, fine motor skills such as cutting and writing. Gross motor skills such as running and jumping. When I'm working with a child, I start noticing patterns. And maybe a child who has an issue with this has an issue with this, and that helps me determine why is that an issue for this particular child. Then there's math difficulties, which could be a language learning difference, or it could be a visual disorder, which could be sequencing, memory, organization of numbers or of operations, or it could have to do with computing principles, counting by multiples, telling time. I'm going through these kind of quickly-ish because I don't expect you to all remember and memorize all of this right now, but we're going to talk more concretely in a moment. Language difficulties, understanding spoken language, producing spoken language, organizing thoughts in the brain, calling upon the right words to verbally explain something or to communicate with someone else. Verbal language skills, ability to retell a story, the fluency of speech, understanding meanings of words, parts of speech, following directions. Further language difficulties which could fall into the category of reading difficulties. Difficulty understanding sound recognition or letter recognition or word recognition. Comprehension, grasping meaning such as words, phrases, ideas, or paragraphs. Fluency, phonetics, and speed. As you hear and see some of these categories, some of you might be thinking, oh wait, my child might have a piece of that, my child might have a piece of that. That helps determine how do you best help your child. What's going to be the best learning situation for your child? What's going to be the best working situation for your child? We're going to get there in a moment. Language difficulties continue. Then there's writing difficulties. Like many times in a school, a child may be labeled as having an LD, learning difficulty, learning disability, whichever they're calling it. But where does it fall within, you see how many possibilities there are here, right? Where does it fall within that? How do we help that child? We lump a group of kids who might have a different way of learning together in the same classroom, and they all have different issues. Even in the traditional classroom where there's nothing that we're going to be diagnosing a particular child with, how do we accommodate different kids who learn in different ways? We're getting there. But writing difficulties could be because of an auditory process, or a visual process, or a physical process, such as difficulty forming words or letters, or neatness, sizing, and spacing, or consistency, such as replicating or spelling. Expressive process difficulty could be something like communicating ideas, organizing thoughts on paper, synthesizing information. I know it's a little overwhelming. We're almost past this. Then there could be, we've talked about different types of reading difficulties and writing difficulties, and we've talked about different types of math difficulties and different types of physical difficulties. Well, what about social and emotional difficulties that affect the learning process? Expressing feelings, calming the self, reading nonverbal cues. All of that can affect success in the classroom, can affect relationships with peers. Parents, we can have a huge impact. Key indicator of success, by the way, outweighs academic factors, okay? We can overcome the issues if we handle things in the right way. Let me now talk more specifically. In those categories, we talked way too much detail about the different types of input and output issues that a child could have. But let's clarify the difference between input and output, because that makes a dramatic difference. And some children, for instance, need a different environment or can succeed better in a certain teacher's environment within a certain classroom. You may notice your children, maybe they respond better to a certain teacher. It could be a specialist teacher they have than different. And it might not be because of the content. It could be because of the way that that teacher is providing the information. But the eyes and the ears are the primary means of delivering information to the brain. We all know that, right? You're getting eyes, I'm providing you slides for those of you who want to see this information. Ears, I'm saying it and sharing it and elaborating with a clear voice, I hope, because some of you need to hear it. We're targeting both of those right now. We'll talk in a little bit, by the way, about, there's that whole kinesthetic approach, the physically doing. And normally when I'm working with kids, I provide multimodal everything. But when I'm working with a group in this setting, I can't really be providing you all that, interactive stuff for those of you who need it. But those who need something physical to do are taking notes or doodling on your papers, and that's perfect. Okay? But, so the eyes and the ears are the primary means of delivering information to the brain, and that's a process that's sometimes called input. How does it come into us? The hands and the mouth are the primary means of communicating information from the brain, and that's what we call output. Okay? So just pretty obvious perhaps what the words input and output mean, but now you see which are the clear ways that information comes in and information goes out. Let's elaborate. Input, auditory processing. Hearing well greatly impacts the ability to read, write, spell, etc. An inability to distinguish subtle sound differences or hearing sounds at the wrong speed makes it difficult to sound out words and understand the basic concepts of reading and writing. Visual processing. Seeing well greatly impacts the ability to see subtle differences in shapes. An inability to distinguish subtle differences makes it difficult to receive letters, and it can cause the reversal of letters or numbers. Skipping words, skipping lines, misperceiving depth or distance, or having problems with eye-hand coordination. Seeing well greatly impacts the gross and fine motor skills, reading comprehension, and mathematics. Keep going. What do we need to do as parents? Here's another one of those key slides that goes nicely on a refrigerator, maybe, or on your own little office bulletin board. Parents need to help their children develop academic knowledge, academic skills, physical skills, social skills, communication skills, critical thinking, solving skills, life skills, emotional well-being, self-esteem, ethics, responsibility, independence. Did you know this is all part of your job description? Did you sign on for that? And ultimately, as people, that's the most important thing. You are needing to be there to help your child develop as a person. Now, all children, especially those with LDs, need support, encouragement, and love. Look at that beautiful, beautiful picture there. Our children need us. Look at this engaged dad looking at his son there, the eye contact. Look at his eyes. Look at how he's really focused on his child there. Our children need us to genuinely be there for them with our attention focused on them. Self-esteem plays a critical role in helping our children with all of this development. When our children look in the mirror, what do they see? Parents need to address challenges in school as best possible and at home for sure. Determining an LD can involve interviewing, testing, history taking, observing. These are all different types of professionals who can help us if we need to try and determine how our child learns differently. How does the brain work, though? Let's talk about that a little bit. The brain works by what's called integration. The brain uses integration to understand information that's been delivered to it by sequencing, which means putting information in the right order, by abstraction, which means making sense of the information, and by organization, using information to form complete thoughts. Each of these three steps is important, and your child may have a weakness in one area or another that causes such a learning difficulty or difference. For example, sequencing is critical to being able to learn the alphabet, the months of the year, counting in multiples. If you were to notice your child, just as an example, keep struggling with getting those months in order. But they also have trouble counting by tens. You might think those are two totally different subject areas, but that shows you, ooh, there probably is a sequencing issue there. That's just an example. If a certain brain activity isn't happening correctly, then it could create a roadblock to learning. We have to make those reconnections. We have to reroute it. LDs, by the way, do not indicate IQ. Some of the brightest people have different ways of learning, and that is part of their brilliance. Some individuals, despite having an average or above average level of intelligence, have real difficulty acquiring the basic academic skills. And even if your child may be the most brilliant natural child on the planet, and we don't help them get the information they need, how can they use that information to be able to use their brilliance? These skills include those needed for successful reading, writing, listening, speaking, arithmetic, etc. What are the types of LDs? Well, LD is a broad term. There are many different kinds of learning disabilities and differences. We saw that giant umbrella, okay? Most often they fall, though, into three broad categories. We're overgeneralizing now, okay? I want to make that clear. There's three broad categories. Reading disabilities, which are often referred to as forms of dyslexia. Written language difficulties, which are often referred to as dysgraphia. And then there's the math disabilities, which are often referred to as dyscalculia. Often, other related categories include disabilities that affect memory, social skills, and executive functions, such as actually beginning a task. And each of these is loaded with different subcategories. Now, this is a quote, by the way, from Bill Bennett, former Secretary of Education. Okay, I've met him on various occasions, and this is a great quote from him. Many aspects of speaking, listening, reading, writing, and arithmetic overlap and build on the same brain capabilities. It is not surprising that people can be diagnosed with more than one learning disability. For example, the ability to understand language underlies learning to speak. Therefore, any disorder that hinders the ability to understand language will also interfere with the development of speech, which in turn hinders learning to read and write. You see, it's like a domino thing. You know, one thing affects another, affects another, affects another. Many children with LDs struggle with reading. The difficulty often begins with individual sounds. Students may have problems with rhyming, pulling words apart into their individual sounds, and putting individual sounds together to form words. This makes it difficult to decode words accurately, which can lead to trouble with fluency and comprehension. As students move through the grades, more and more of the information that they need to learn is presented in written through textbooks and oral through lecture form. And if they're struggling with those kinds of issues, then the problems will exacerbate and snowball. This exacerbates, as I say, the difficulties they have succeeding in school. Now, this is fascinating. I find it fascinating. You may or may not agree. $14 million went into a national literacy survey in 1992. And it determined that most adults in the survey, by the way, had finished high school. Okay, so most of the adults had finished high school, but 96% of them could not read, write, and figure well enough to succeed in college.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the exact response that I have to this. Even more to the point, 25% were plainly unable to read at a grade school level. These are people who are primarily high school graduates that are adults functioning in our society. In 2003, they did another version of the study. It just changed name, but it was the same study, basically. It was called the 2003 National Assessment of Adult Literacy. Found that reading comprehension levels did not significantly change between 1992 and 2003. So 10 years later, we still have the same results. They have not done a study, which would be now about 10 years later, but I'm assuming the results are not better, and they may be worse, but I doubt that they have gotten better. This should raise flags for all of us and to make sure our children are functioning at proper levels. I will go on my own little diatribe here just for a moment that I am not an advocate of the Common Core curriculum and situation that our state is putting into or has put into effect. Okay? We are, I believe, dumbing down our educational system to cater more to the masses who are already less educated instead of doing what we can to raise the educational level of those who are not there yet. Okay? And this, to me, is why I think the study, if we were to do one now, I don't think we're doing one now very specifically because I think it's clearly known that it would be worse than this. Look at that building. Who wants to live there? Who wants to move their office in there? Is this really acceptable? Imagine doing a building survey and finding that the walls of 96% of all the homes are severely cracked and that 25% of the houses are so weak with their walls that they're about to collapse. Well, that's what we're saying has happened with our education. Now, wouldn't we immediately start an investigation into the building practices of the builders? Wouldn't we mandate them being more careful to provide proper foundations for these homes? Well, that's what we need to do. Provide a better foundation educationally for our children in order that they don't become a part of the next survey of this. In the same way that a foundation of a building must be built well in order for the building to not collapse, children need solid foundations as well. You've seen this ladder before. We need to help our children climb the learning ladder, one rung at a time. You have your children maybe at the playground, and especially when they're really little, and they're trying to climb over the rungs of the ladder, climbing up the climbing structure, and they're just not ready to do it. They have to take it one rung at a time, or they're about to fall down into the sand or the rubber or whatever is the base on the bottom of the playground. Okay? When a child misses a rung, they can fall off. There's skills that need to be acquired before trying to move further up the ladder. Who can read that? Not just read it, but I mean, who can understand it? Anybody? I'll be very impressed. I've used this many, many times. Nobody in any of my presentations ever known what it meant. Anybody know? I'm not going to tell you. Unless one has first learned to speak Swahili, one would not be able to properly read the above Swahili sentence. I'll save it for another presentation when somebody finally knows. This shows that language is at the very bottom of the learning ladder. If your child does not have the proper grasp of English, everything else is lost. Okay? And that is a problem in many of our schools at a whole different level. But this is a sentence in Swahili. If somebody could translate it, I would have had a prize for you. Okay. The role of language in the acquisition of the 3 R's, yes, by the way, there are 4 R's in my book. I do seminars for teachers about the 4 R's. It's not just reading, writing, and arithmetic. I know arithmetic does not start with an R, but for years we've called it education. The 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. I throw in the 4th R of reasoning. We need to help our children learn to critically think, problem solve, all of that as well. But nonetheless, the role of language in the acquisition of the 3 R's can be compared to the role of running in the game of soccer, or ice skating in the game of ice hockey. Your child cannot play soccer if he or she can't run. And your child can't play ice hockey if he or she can't skate. Okay? Well, how can we function in school if we don't have the proper reading skills and we saw the horrible statistics about our reading educational levels? One can't read a book in any language, let alone Swahili. No one can write or well communicate unless one knows the particular language. Verbal skills comprise the first rung of the learning ladder. Nonverbal skills comprise the second rung. That may sound reverse to what you would have thought about, but verbal skills come first. The whole conglomeration of nonverbal skills that are foundational to learning. Skills of importance include concentration, visual discrimination, accurate observation, memorization, skills of association, auditory, and memory. These are functions that should be taught at a preschool level to form the foundation of good reading, writing, and arithmetic. One visual discriminatory skill that plays a very important role, and I'm just using an example because I can't teach you everything about every possible learning issue all in one session, but I want to give you some clear ideas to help you put this in perspective. So one visual discriminatory skill that plays a very important role in reading is the ability to distinguish between left and right. Like all the other nonverbal skills, this ability is not innate. A child is not born knowing the difference between left and right. We take it so for granted maybe in our adult lives. But it must be taught to the point of becoming automatic, and that's the case with so many things our children need to learn. The human body consists of 2 halves, a left side and a right side. The human brain also has 2 halves, which are connected by the corpus callosum. Okay, again, science you don't need to know there, but let's keep going. Each of us needs to interpret everything we encounter in terms of our own sidedness. A child, however, who has not adequately internalized his own sidedness will be prone to incorrect interpretations in terms of sidedness. You're going to notice this being very common in a moment. Many of you will resonate back to your little children if yours are older. One situation where sidedness plays a particularly important role is distinguishing between a B and a D. Whose child at one point struggled making B's and D's backwards? Most. And it most of the time goes back to the fact that they haven't internalized sidedness before we've gotten to understanding our letters. We have to get things in order. It's clear that the only difference between them is the position of the straight line. It's either on the left or on the right. A person who's confused about left and right cannot use mnemonics or memory aids while reading, as is often valuable to learning. Now, one helpful idea, this is what I always recommend at an early age. It also has other benefits. One helpful idea is for a child to wear a watch and remember that the watch is on the left wrist. Or if your child prefers to wear it on the right, then make sure they drill to know that it's on their right wrist. But then they will always know which is left or right if they always have the watch on whichever side they're going to do. Most of us happen to put it on the left side. Okay? Then we also get them telling time at an early age too, and being conscious of time at an early age. There's a lot of other benefits to that. Only when a child has climbed the first and second rungs will he or she be prepared for the third rung. What's the third rung? That's the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay? Remember that every journey starts with a first step. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with but one step. Unless you help your child make the first step, how is he or she going to be able to successfully complete the learning journey? So you have to help them step by step. This, don't worry about this, not going to read this, but anybody know about IDEA? Not the fact that I'm giving you many ideas right now, I hope, but IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's basically the government regulations that state that the schools must provide what your child needs. According, though, to the Department of Education, 1 in 7 children requires special assistance in the learning process. That's according to the Department of Education. I have yet to see a school, unless it's a specialized school that particularly focuses in this area, where 1 in every 7 children is getting the special assistance. Just some different things that might be running through people's heads. I'll move past. We need to help our children unlearn negative self-concepts. See, these kinds of things, we may have different issues that we might need help with, but we don't want to be negative images in our heads. We don't want our children to be walking around thinking, I've got a learning disability, I've got problems, I don't learn the same as everybody else, and they're not going to say it in that sing-songy fashion. Okay? We need to help our children unlearn negative self-concepts, devastating self-concepts of feeling abnormal and defective. We need to help them see what's right with themselves rather than what is wrong. I say that again. It's your job as a parent to help your child see what is right with him or her, not what is wrong. Now, that doesn't mean you accept the things that are not going well. You find solutions for them, but let them be positive about their strengths, okay? And in case you can't see, the lighting is a little weird here. The fortune cookie says, just be yourself. You're wonderful. We need to empower them. We need to help them see their differences as strengths and not as problems, damage, impairment. Get them to love themselves. A couple of you I noticed were reacting when we had the slide much earlier about the mismatched ceiling tiles. I won't mention behind their back students that I know and work with, but I can tell you their stories without their names. Okay? There's a little 11-year-old I know who goes to LAUSD school, probably about just 5 miles from here. And he is one of those kids. He is struggling in a classroom when the teacher hasn't erased something off of the whiteboard. There's that tiny little mark, and that is his focus, okay? Or the fact that the tables, excuse me, while you're writing, that was bothering me before, okay? That table was not lined up. Actually, I was okay with it, but I do like it better this way. But he would have had trouble. He's the kid who's going to be constantly shifting the desk with the kids next to him to make sure it's lined up right. And the other kid moves his chair, so he has to move his chair. These are issues. But do you know what? That's a strength. It's not a weakness. Because it enables him when he does projects and reports. He's in 5th grade right now. And he does projects and reports. Everything is so meticulously done. He is so thorough about everything. It's a strength. But we have to be conscious of that. The teacher in the room should be more conscious of it to enable him to succeed better. And the parents need to be conscious of this kind of a situation. Mom tells him to go sit at the kitchen table and get your homework done, but there's some crumbs over there on the table. You don't understand. I can't focus until those crumbs. And he starts to get up and try to brush the crumbs. He's actually helping Mom clean up. And Mom's like, get back in that seat and do your work. Okay? The thing is, what we think of as weaknesses can be strengths if we look at them in the right way, but we have to be conscious of them to help our children. We have to help our children love themselves, but at the same time, it doesn't mean we have to have them love things that we can improve upon and help them be better with. We need to nurture our children's strengths. When a child grows up feeling less than, stupid, lazy, and defective, life can be pretty hopeless. And some parents, I'm sure none in this room, make their children feel that way. They're like, what, are you so stupid you can't get that? Because they're not understanding where their child's coming from. And it's hurtful and it's destructive and it works against any positive development. It's our job as the adults in their lives to help them understand that they are not these negative labels and that the future holds wonderful possibilities for them. Now, you've seen cycles like this probably at some point in your lives. Thoughts create feelings. Feelings create behavior. Behavior reinforces thoughts, and those thoughts create feelings. And so our children could be on a cycle going round and round of negativity that keeps them from ever succeeding, but we have to help them step out of that cycle and get onto a different cycle that's a positive cycle. We need to be advocates for our children, and we need to love them unconditionally. That does not mean, however, that we have to simply accept what we can help them improve. And I make that very, very clear, because sometimes people are so focused, and I find a lot of parents in the LA area, certain communities in particular, and I'm not saying this community, but there's one in particular that's in my mind. I won't say it. Okay, it's not here. Where parents are so focused on just making their child feel good that they forget to help their child improve and be the best that their child can be. We need to help them find and develop coping strategies for dealing with the difficulties they experience with organization or impulsiveness or attention. Whatever it is, let's help them deal with these things to become better versions of themselves. There are some things about our children that we may not be able to change. Aha! But even then, we can change the environment and the system of support for them. And I think that's why, most of you are probably here. You want to be able to provide the best environment and system of support for your child. Our children need us to help provide support for their weaknesses. And again, we also need to further nurture their strengths. Okay, I say that again. We need to provide support for the areas in which they are not so strong yet. But we also should further nurture the strengths and help them be even stronger and not just accept that they're already great in that area. We need to acknowledge effort when success is not attained. Poor question. I do a whole separate session in this kind of an area. I do a lot of different parent sessions, as some of you know. I would never ask a child when they come home and the test was, was graded and they're coming home with this test. What did you get? What's your grade? It would be a matter of, what did you learn? What would you like to learn? Things of that nature. How do you feel about how you did? All of those are better than just focusing on the grade and the end result. Did you do your best? Obviously, that's an important thing. And that's what I'm saying here. Acknowledge the effort, even when success is not attained. We need to recognize our children's hard work. We need them to know that their effort is genuinely valued and appreciated and worthwhile. Look at this picture. We need to help our children learn that being resilient and courageous are important to learn and that we are proud of them for learning these valuable lessons. As adults, don't we need to be resilient and be courageous? When we look in the mirror, what do we see? Now, even without specific diagnosable learning differences, let's assume that some of you do not have diagnosable, your children do not have specifically diagnosable learning differences, but they are the unique creatures that they are. And as I said, every child learns differently. So, recognize, please, that all children have learning differences because all children learn differently and all children should be taught differently. Is your child that square peg and are you trying to force them into that round hole? Let's try to find the perfect square hole for your child. Let's talk about now, how does your child learn? In what way does he or she learn new material best? What type of learning style does your child favor? There are three major, and again, I don't like broad generalizations, but sometimes they are helpful. There are three major types of learning styles that any of us, parents, kids, etc., learn by. Some of us are more auditory learners. That's those of you in this room who are hopefully resonating with my voice. Some of us are more visual learners. Some of us, seeing these slides is really helpful and valuable. Some of us are more kinesthetic learners, and I admit it, I'm not providing as much for you for that in this context, but maybe some of you are sitting there, with your little electronic devices and pens and paper. At least you've got things in your hand for that kinesthetic need to some degree. What kind of learner are you? Look at this image here. Why are these different styles important? Determining learning style can make a big difference in a student's school success. The trick is determining what learning style or combination of learning styles works best for the student. Look at these two. It's not a boy-girl thing, it's a child-child thing. But this little girl here, she's reading the instructions carefully, and I know most of the time women think men don't read instructions, but nonetheless, it's not really intended as a boy-girl thing. Okay? She's reading the instructions, following the instructions, and when she is done, her little model airplane will be built right. Him? He sees it, he visualizes it, he doesn't need the instructions. And look, he actually even did it first. This is not a competition or a race. But the point is, different kids need different things. Different kids learn in different ways. Visual learners are those who generally think in terms of visual representations. They learn better by seeing and watching. They prefer to see things in written down handouts like texts, overhead slides, etc. Helpful to the visual learners. Now, if your child is more of a visual learner, this is concrete stuff that better helps them. Lists. Diagrams, maps, graphs, charts, illustrations, note-taking, reading, rereading, outlining, highlighting, using flashcards. All of these are devices that could help with a child who is particularly a visual learner. Now, a teacher who says every child in the classroom must do this in the same way is not recognizing the fact that different kids need different things. Also, visual learners cue in from the teacher's facial expressions and body language. Think about some of those earlier slides, the body language, the facial expression, and it turns a child off from education because of the visual learning aspect, whereas a child who's not so visually focused is not going to be noticing and caring about that. Auditory learners, again, this is a broad generalization. Those who generally think in terms of sounds. They learn better by hearing. They prefer to hear instructions and other information. What is helpful to auditory learners? And some of these are going to be similar things, but they're used in different ways. Mnemonics, songs for learning, background music for focus. By the way, I think it's great for a child to have background music, like classical music, not music with lyrics that can be distracting, but music in a background can help a lot of children be able to function and focus and all of that. Many classrooms I've worked with teachers, and they put a little bit of Mozart on very softly in the background, and suddenly those distracting noises of the kid flipping their paper or clicking their pen or something like that become less of a distraction because the music becomes a helpful focus for that auditory child. Background music for focus, rhymes, reading out loud, reciting out loud, explaining what they've learned out loud, discussions, recording instructions and lessons. I have a child who's a particular high school that was denied an opportunity recently. He goes to a very prestigious, expensive private high school in the area, to remain nameless. And this child, his learning style really benefits if he could just record the lessons, put his phone down or some electronic device, record the lesson to be able to hear it again later. That will help him learn it so much better. And the teacher refuses to allow it because the teacher's kind of afraid of being maybe caught saying something that they shouldn't say or whatever. That's my theory. That's my thinking. The teacher won't allow it, and the administration left it up to the teacher. If the teacher gives approval, then you can. So this child is being denied what's in his best interests. What helps? Articulate, expressive teachers. Not the boring, like what was that TV show where the science teacher was always, Today, class, we will.
Ben Stein.
Yes, there's quite a few. Yeah, Ben Stein is classic there, yes. They cue in from teacher's tone of voice, speed, volume, inflection. Notice I try to have some of that in my speaking for those of you who need it. Kinesthetic learners, which are also called tactile learners, those who generally think in terms of touch. They learn better by moving, by feeling, by experiencing. They prefer to move and touch things. If your child, everywhere you go, is just touching every little thing, that might be a clue here, okay? Helpful to kinesthetic learners are manipulatives. And I do another presentation where I bring in a whole bunch of manipulatives, and you can see the different things that kind of help. You know, some kids, just by the way, having that little stress ball that they're squeezing and moving and doing stuff with, it has nothing to do with the lesson at hand. Some kids, it's just they need to be moving. Whereas another kid, they need maybe those little Unifix cubes to be adding and doing their math and all that. They need it for the lesson itself. So there's different types of kinesthetic and tactile learners. Some it's just a matter of moving, and some it's a matter of moving for the sake of learning. So helpful, stress balls, silly putty, other fidgeting devices, being able to get up and pace. Doing skits and role playing, like some kids think, you know, like in their social studies class. I think of a certain class I was in recently. It was a 4th grade class. They're learning about the missions and all of that. And this teacher loves having kids do skits. Okay, they have the kids get up and do skits about the different chapters and the different sections in the social studies book, that, you know, standard blue textbook that they probably use here as well. And for most of the kids in that classroom, it's a waste of their time and effort and energy because it's not an efficient form of learning for most kids, because most kids are not actually the tactile learners. But for the kid who needs to be getting up and moving and being kinesthetic, it's really beneficial to them. Why does this teacher teach that way? Because this teacher learned best that way. And that's one of the problems, by the way. Teachers often teach to their students as if their students are little versions of themselves and going to learn in the same way that they teach, or that they learned themselves, okay? And it's the same thing as parents. We have to remember our children are not little versions of ourselves. Just because we learn best in a certain way doesn't mean that that's what's going to be in their best interest for them to learn. Shifting from subject to subject, as opposed to staying on the same subject for a long time, is better for a kinesthetic learner. The block scheduling that many of our high schools have gone to is atrocious for a kinesthetic learner. Crafts, models, science experiments, field trips, games like Scrabble and Smack, the physical act of writing, note-taking. It's not the writing, by the way. Notice we said before, the visual learner needs to see the notes. The kinesthetic learner needs to take the notes. In fact, if we team them up, I'm not saying we need to do this, but we could actually have one kid who needs to take the notes and never needs to see them. The kinesthetic learner will benefit. Give them to the kid next to them who may not take such good notes, but who needs the visual notes. That's actually not a bad thing. That's really good helpfulness to each other. Flashcards, holding the book while reading. Just holding the book can be really helpful for kinesthetic learner as opposed to putting it flat. And I've seen teachers say to a child, put that flat on the desk. Excuse me. Well, wait a minute. For some kids, it's better to actually hold the book. It helps them. Step-by-step instructions, etc. These students cue in from teachers' movements. So yes, I do move around a little bit. And I'm not moving around as much as I usually do, as I said I would, just because the visual here is not the big screen I'm used to, and that's okay. And I want to be able to see it closer as well. So think about yourself, think about your children. Are you more visual, more auditory, more kinesthetic? But let's not label and make a judgment call, but let's just get a sense of it. Simplified, visual. Do you need to see it? Auditory. Do you need to hear it or say it? And those are two different things too, right? Just like I told you about different types of kinesthetic learners. Auditory. Some need to be saying it and some just need to be hearing it. Kinesthetic, need to do it. Statistically speaking, and this is an oversimplification. I always make that clear because I really don't like oversimplifying, but sometimes it helps. 60% of children learn best by seeing. Teachers who never give handouts and never write on the board, they're losing those children. 25% of learners are kinesthetic and learn by doing, and most teachers do not cover that, or minimally. Only 15% of learners learn by listening, by hearing. And isn't that the way the majority of our educational system is designed? Teachers talk, kids listen. Yet that's the minority of students. Now, I'm going to complicate it for you. I said I oversimplified it here. Now I'm going to complicate it. We add in a couple of other things here. Auditory we already had. Visual we had. Kinesthetic we had. But the kinesthetic in this category is more the kinesthetic who just needs to move. Squeezing the stress ball is enough. They don't need some manipulative to learn the lesson. But the reading and writing, the kid who actually needs that kinesthetic movement connected with the lesson is a slightly different category in this design. This is a different study. But again, notice the very, very prominent category here, seeing, 60%. The V of visual is the first here, the first here, the first here. So again, the visual, even in this study that broke it down into different categories, the visual is still the prominent for most kids, but this understands the fact that no child, or most children, are not falling into just one nice, neat category. Think about, yourself or your children. You may see, maybe visually, most of you probably, that is a very important thing for you to learn, but it's not the only thing. You do learn from other things as well. So this one breaks it down into combinations and permutations thereof. Now this one, a little more progressive, out of the 1970s, okay? We talk about other types of intelligence too, and this is important. I'm not poo-pooing this in any way, shape, or form. Well, there's different types of intelligence. There's logical intelligence, and musical intelligence, and just knowing people intelligence, and nature intelligence, and being intelligent and knowing yourself. And then there's the word smart, and the picture smart, and the body smart. And these are other things, just to keep in mind. Education is not just about the stuff that comes in the textbooks. There's other types of intelligence we want our children to grow with.
That's a good slide.
Say again?
That's a good slide.
Glad to hear that. Glad to hear you appreciate that. Now this one takes it and broadens things a little further. We've got sensorial intelligence in cognitive and physical and social and emotional and language, and then we break it into the categories. And again, most of our school is focused over here, the reading, writing, the communication, not so much some of these other things, okay? Even in the mathematical area, the cognitive mathematical is where we focus in most of our math classes, but what about the conceptual? Let's not just have our child memorize how to, multiply, two-digit numbers, but conceptually, why does it work that way? How does it fit together? How can I apply this? How can I use this? All of these other things should be an important part of our education as well. This one, you may not be able to read it, but basically it's similar to the one that you liked, but it talks about there's the naturalist intelligence, the interpersonal, the existential. It's a little more progressive. This actually came out of taking the 70s thing and turning it into an 80s thing. Okay, but nonetheless, the question is, which road are you helping your child on? Life is a series of intersections. It's a series of crossroads. And you have the power to choose which direction, which road are you going to turn down, right? And you may not see the clear labels on the roads. The road is not going to be saying, this is the path I take if I want my child to fail. This is the path. It's not so clearly labeled, but you want to try and determine which is going to be in your child's best interest to help your child optimally become the best for who he or she has the potential to be. This is not what I would say the solution is, okay? Many people revert to old-fashioned, they're not that old-fashioned, I guess, but to archaic, I would say, ways of using medication to help our child deal with things. I will use a specific example here. Like I said, my doctoral work, my doctoral dissertation is non-medicinal alternatives to dealing with ADHD. ADHD is a real thing. It does exist, okay? Some people say it doesn't even exist, but I would say the majority of kids who are labeled with ADD, ADHD are inaccurately labeled. It's sometimes kids just being kids and adults not knowing how to handle these kids, and we just try to oversimplify things, and we give our children medication as a way to make our jobs easier and our lives easier, but it's not what's in our children's best interest. But it is a real thing. But I will tell you, I've worked with plenty of kids throughout the years, and we've gotten them to get off of their medications. See? What learners are we having trouble with? See? I've helped children get off of their medications, get rid of their symptoms. We don't need this. I'm not saying there is not a time and a place where medication is important in a person's life. I'm not against the pharmaceutical industry completely. I'm just against overusing it and using it as a quick fix when it's really not the solution that we need. And FYI, for the ADD, ADHD situations I've worked with kids, we do a tri-modal approach, which is a whole different session. We change their diet, we change their physical activity routines, and we change their sleep habits. And those three things together have been very successful about helping kids get off of this. Okay? But many people, you have the child who is the kinesthetic learner who needs to move, and what's the first thing we want to do is, that child is ADHD, let's get him on medication so I can teach my class better. Okay? But it's not in that child's best interests, and it's not in any of our best interests in the long run. That could have been the child who could have been the one who had the brilliant cure to cancer or something like that, and we stifled them at an early age, and they never became what they could have become. This, you may or may not be able to see this. Again, the visual's not kind of the way I wanted exactly, I apologize, but there's all sorts of complex mathematical formulae on this little board here, and the guy up here is saying, the whole thing's on the board, how come you don't understand it? It's so easy. Well, what's easy for one person is not necessarily easy for another. And we need to recognize that as parents, something that us may be easy, even something to think of as simple as tying your shoelaces. okay? You may be frustrated with getting your child to tie their shoelaces, and maybe that's why you buy Velcro or use slip-ons or something of that nature, okay? But, your child should learn to tie their shoelaces, but maybe one of your children, it took them, a few sessions and they learned it, and then the next one, they're struggling with it, okay? Well, let's help them, let's help them, let's help them, and then they'll be able to do it, but some kids take more time than others, and whether it be that or something like this, like a bunch of calculus and physics formulae on the board here, okay? Teachers should not just assume it's easy because they're the expert in the subject. They're the one who's teaching this subject. It should be easy to them, right? You're adults, you're parents. Things that your child learned in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade should be easy to you, okay? We hope it is, but it shouldn't be necessarily easy to the child who it's new to. Now this is a nice little flow chart that basically talks about different ways we can assess and different modifications of what are possible to be done. We can modify content of what our child is learning. You may not have that power at home. When you're supplementing, you do, okay? But you have the power to maybe help with the process. How is your child going to learn it best? To help with the product, that's up to the teacher again. What is the end result of it? Like, kids in a classroom, an elementary school classroom, have to do book reports, right? Many teachers have them do the 5-paragraph, the basic summary of the book. Who are the characters? What is the setting? Blah, 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 blah. And that's good, and that's important, and I think, it's good for every child to do that. But some kids will actually learn more about the book when they know they're creating a board game out of it, or creating a game show out of it, or whatever. I mean, there's other output processes. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about product, is how did the child show that they learned what they needed to learn? And then the learning environment is a big thing as well. And I know that many of you here have children who are, obviously, you're here because your children are in Carpenter, but they're not going to be in Carpenter forever. You hope that they will eventually grow and get older and pass the grades to be able to move on somewhere else. And I don't know how many parents here are of which different grade levels, and that's not a big deal, but eventually you're going to be looking at other schools. And I know one of the questions is, well, where do I send my child from here? And there's no easy answer for me to give you about that. What you want to do, because every one of you has a different child, and even some of you have multiple children, okay? The 2 children that I've raised, they both went to totally different schools, okay? It was in their best interests, okay? And I realize that burdens you as a parent, makes it harder. There's a family I know, lives on the west side, they have 3 kids, and they have gone through 3 totally different educational paths. I really give them a lot of credit, but I also know it puts a lot of burden on those parents, especially when it comes to vacations and school schedules, and they don't even mesh and all of that kind of thing. And then you feel like you've got your chauffeur's hat on and that's all you're ever doing. But I'm not saying you need to send your children to different schools than each other, but what I am saying is, just because you're sitting next to each other and your children are friends in a certain classroom here right now, doesn't mean that sending your children to the same school the next year will be in their best interests. And I know kids often will be like, well, I want to go where my friends are going. But you want to think about what's in their best interest, and I can't tell you, I don't know your children yet. I can't tell you what is going to be in the best interest for your child. I will tell you, and this is the real worst thing I'm going to say today, is I don't think there's any good choices. There are definitely choices that are better than others, and for a certain child, I could say, for this child, this particular school might be best, and for this child, this particular school might be best. But it doesn't mean it's optimal and ideal. And what I would recommend highly is, you cannot control the fact that a school is not the ideal school for your child, but you can control what are you going to do? How are you going to supplement? How are you going to end up providing outside of school to help your child succeed? And that has to do with things like, how do you even set up the right workspace for your child, which I do a whole other session on. How do you set up your child's workspace at home? I always do that at the beginning of the school year to get parents on track before school even starts. Some kids will do better by working in their room, in quiet, at their desk. And some kids will do better at a table in the kitchen where they've got that connection with you. You're there, and they function better because somebody is there, even though you're just letting them do their work. Different kids function different ways. So it's not just how you set up the space. Some kids, by the way, need a solid, structured chair. Some kids, a chair that can recline back and his armrest is going to be a much better situation for most kids. Lighting is very important for kids. There's so many things to set up the right workspace for your child that you can do at home. What about the activities you have your child do in the after-school hours? That's important for your child. And I do believe that every child benefits by being involved in some kind of sport, but that does not mean that sports should rule their lives. And I know so many kids in the LA area who are always going from sport to sport to sport, and they don't even have time just to be free and be kids. Yeah. I think every child benefits by having music. Okay? And playing a musical instrument. There are so many things that children benefit by and can do really, really, well for them. But you don't want to overprogram a child, but you don't want to underprogram a child and have a child just sitting there being a couch potato all day either. There's so many other issues, but When you're supplementing, besides music and sports and all of these things, which are wonderful, what about getting a child involved in some opportunity, some activity that will take their weaknesses and help them get stronger so they can succeed better at school? What about helping your child get more strength and challenging in an area that they're already fabulous at, but they're bored with in school? There's so many things that you want to look at that you can do outside of the school environment. So no matter what school you send your child to, I highly encourage you to find the right things outside of school to make their life better, to make them succeed better, to make them more complete. But as far as which schools, no matter which school you go to, I have yet to find a school that is doing everything that I'm saying they should be doing for the best interests of every child, and therefore I can't tell all of you, this is the school to send your child to. Okay, does that make sense? But I will be happy to take some questions in a moment. It's a real jigsaw puzzle. It really is. But let's put the pieces together to help our children reach for success. And then over here, the quick little thing that you already have a version of on the back of your picture there, on the back of your paper there, is in order to continue to help your child be the best that he or she can be, I encourage you to attend more parenting education classes. Every month I have at least one free parent ed class. The schedule is at parenting.education. It's an easy website, www.parenting.education. I have some cards up here I can give you in a little bit. But I encourage you to go to more classes and learn more about other areas of parenting as well. And this is just a taste of some things that could open your eyes a little bit to how you can better help your children. I always encourage kids, just like I said, sports are important and music is important, and there are plenty of people in LA doing great things with that. Something that I found was lacking in this city that I created a little over 20 years ago was the Kids Make a Difference Foundation, an opportunity for kids to reach out and do free projects on weekends. I'm not about making money, I'm about trying to make a difference in the world. That's my mission in life. And I think it's really important for a child to grow up realizing that there is a world out there beyond them, that they have the power to make a difference. And I will tell you, by the way, I've been doing this for over 20 years, the kids who've grown up through these Kids Make a Difference projects, not a single one of them has ever turned to drugs, become depressed, gone suicidal, etc. I did a study years ago on why do so many high school kids become suicidal. Okay? And I found that the majority of those kids were the highest achieving kids. The kids who were straight A students, quarterback of the football team, head cheerleader, blah, 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 blah. And you would think those would be the less likely, because these are the kids who are succeeding at such high levels that they see the problems of the world, they feel overwhelmed by the problems of the world, they feel like, so what does it matter that I can do this and I can do this and I can do this? The world is doomed and hopeless. But if you give a child a chance from an early age to reach out and make a difference, they realize that they matter and they can do something in this world. So Kids Make a Difference, we have these great projects for elementary school kids. Don't hesitate to get one-on-one support. I am only one avenue you can consider, but if you want to meet and discuss more specifically your child's individual needs, this is just one of my websites. I have too many. Independent.education is easy to remember there. And then I also have camp programs. I have day camps and overnight camps. My camp programs, by the way, are limited to a maximum of 12 kids in an entire camp with 3 adults. And I mean adults. We don't use 14-year-old kids as counselors. We don't use 18-year-old kids as counselors. We're talking about adults who are credentialed and licensed and certified and all of that kind of thing, who are really experts in guiding kids to become the most that they can be. So those are just a few things. I've got some cards here, but while I'm passing some of those out, how about I take some questions if you would like?